Before we begin watching, I want to tell you about a great channel called Don't Look Back. Its author releases many cool videos about mysteries, investigations of disappearances, and conspiracy theories that I've already watched with pleasure. You'll find captivating cemetery stories, stories about cursed houses, the scariest urban legends and living dolls. You'll learn what those strange rustling and creaking sounds in your apartment at night are, what poltergeists have to do with it, and what secrets the Cecil Hotel hides where every floor, every room is literally soaked in blood. You'll also investigate crimes together with the author, like those of American psychopath Franklin Floyd. I'll leave a link to the channel in the description below the video. Subscribe right now. My name on this channel. I collect not just scary stories but my own investigations of the most mystical events. I invite you to look beyond. Follow me, but remember there's one rule: don't look back. Death Cycle. Quiet, unhurried music was playing. Frank Sinatra was singing leisurely and tenderly about love. In the cabin, in front of a beautiful wooden chessboard, sat the ship's captain. Across from him sat one of the service robots. The robot waited patiently. The captain was thinking, not rushing. His hand in a black pulsing glove slowly floated over the board, over the white pieces arranged in 2 rows, stopped above the polished round head of a pawn and froze. E4, the captain smiled and said, "There was this book, The 12 Chairs, have you read it?" "No, I don't have such information in my database." The captain sighed, smiled, leaned back in his chair without making a move. "Wonderful book, only the ending came out ugly, pathetic. The main hero, Ostap Bender, how can I explain this to you?" "Captain, time," the robot reminded. The captain looked at the handheld indicator. It had shrunk to a tiny stub just a centimeter long and had changed color to crimson. The captain smiled bitterly and said ironically, "Time, we have plenty of time with you, don't we? The echelon is approaching. Let me just tell you a story." But still, he moved the pawn to E4. "Wait, here's the thing." The game proceeded unhurriedly. The robot, controlled by the ship's Central Information Core, made respectful pauses before each move, exactly 2 minutes and 20 seconds. This periodicity, it had determined, contributed most to the captain's peace of mind. Meanwhile, the captain leisurely told about the misadventures of the great combinator. By the time the segment on the captain's wrist had shrunk to a narrow strip, they had managed to make 6 moves. The robot had advanced its knight on the left flank, opening the way for the bishop on the right. But then the indicator squeaked like a crushed mouse and went out completely. "Time's up," the captain sighed and began to examine the board with interest, silently. A minute later, the captain's eyes bulged horribly as he desperately tried to catch at least a gulp of air. His fingers twisted in terrible convulsions. Another minute later, he collapsed. The indicator on his chest changed color to blue. "Coma." The robot waited. A little more time passed, and the indicator's color changed to black. The captain was dead. The robot stood up, easily lifted the lifeless body in its arms, carried it to the waste disposal unit, and threw it in. Then it returned to its place at the table and sat down to wait. The song ended. A click was heard as the music player turned off, and silence fell. The robot waited. There was a knock on the cabin door. A muffled voice came from behind the door panels. "Have you cleaned up in there?" "Yes," the robot replied. The door opened. Behind it stood the captain. He entered and took his place. "So where were we?" he asked. At the pre-flight press conference, the team of astronauts sat in flight suits at a long table. Before each crew member was a microphone. On the sides sat specialists from the communication department in business suits like black ravens. Technical project managers stood nearby. At the podium was a public relations specialist. Camera flashes, the rustle of whispers from the hall, the creaking of chairs, the gleam of camera lenses. The noise subsided. The media representatives settled in, waiting. The PR specialist flashed a perfectly rehearsed smile and began his memorized speech. They listened attentively. Dictaphones were visible, raised. Camera lenses watched his articulation carefully. His eyes caught the well-placed gestures of his well-groomed white hands. The speech ended. Question time. A correspondent in a crumpled Boston suit raised his hand, asked loudly and confidently, "Does the crew's level of training correspond to the mission? As I understand it, this won't be a standard flight." An unpleasant question. An unpleasant smile from the man with thick lips framed by gray stubble. He stood, didn't sit, waiting. A crew member approached the microphone, the psychologist, also the doctor, also the xenopsychologist, also responsible for crew selection. He was tactful, confident. "Sit down," he began, immediately putting the correspondent in the position of a guest. "Yes, you understand correctly. The crew selection was carried out carefully. Those you see now were selected from more than 2,000 applicants." The correspondent tried to rise with a new question, but the psychologist preempted him. "I assure you, they are much more competent in their positions than you are in yours." Spazabo. Next. Everything went according to plan. Standard questions with rehearsed answers. What was the purpose of the flight? The second planet of the Alpha 7 solar system, where conditions theoretically suitable for life should exist. Flight time, 81 months. That's 6 years and 9 months, someone calculated. I understand the crew will be in anabiosis. Of course, except in emergency situations. Then Captain Andrei Mikhailovich will be awakened and will act according to circumstances. What about the astronauts' families? Of course there were families. A woman, of course young, with unnaturally painted lips to the point of pornographic parody, in a tight-fitting business skirt suit. According to the contract, crew members' earnings would be deposited into their designated accounts. The PR specialist smiled and added, "I think they won't neglect their wives." How long will it take to install the gates? This was a serious correspondent with a strict face, thin, dry lips, a Virgo type. From 1 to 3 months. Given the importance of the project, I'd like to know what safety guarantees there are for the crew in case of emergency. The same business gentleman. A revolutionary safety system has been implemented on the ship, the PR specialist answered cheerfully, having anticipated this question from the very beginning. The ship is equipped with an instant post-cloning unit. All crew members have undergone genetic scanning and will be restored after their physical death. Also, all crew members have been implanted with information transfer modules. He smiled. The restored specialist will remember everything up to the last moment of their previous life. The girl who had asked about families spoke up. "Sorry, I didn't finish." The specialist smiled expressively. The girl couldn't help but smile back. In case the ship's conditions don't correspond to comfortable well-being of the crew, the cloning system has a small innovation. The restored will be in special biological protective suits. We call them rescue suits. How do you remove these suits? The first correspondent who had asked the unsuccessful question about crew qualifications spoke up. It's simple. It's not so much a protective suit as a symbiont. After its life period, it simply dies off, like snake skin. What's the life period? Someone else asked. The hall had noticeably perked up. Maximum 6 hours, plus or minus a few minutes. The PR specialist flashed his white teeth again. The hall buzzed with questions. Someone asked about brain transplantation in such a post-clone. Someone loudly declared this was the beginning of immortality. All crew members of the interstellar ship Alpha 7 smiled as they had been taught, nodded occasionally, and waited impatiently for the whole circus to end. First came the cold, terrible, inhuman, impossible. It drowned all thoughts, even his own name was impossible to remember. Then the cold began to recede gradually and thoughts came. Memories. He was the captain of the interstellar ship Alpha 7. He should be in anabiosis until arrival in orbit around the planet or there had been an emergency. He opened his eyes, bright light, Blinding white spots, some barely distinguishable dark silhouettes. Everything was blurry, smeared. He closed his eyes again, counted to 60, opened them. Vision returned. Without leaving the anabiosis chamber, he pressed the communication button and said, "Report." A measured voice came from the speaker. "Malfunction in the air regeneration system." "Clear." Andrew reluctantly turned his head from side to side. His neck hurt terribly, had gone numb. "Get out of the anabiosis chamber," he muttered under his breath, cursing everything and everyone because this air regeneration system was the last thing the crew in anabiosis needed. Still, the first thing he did was check the hermetically sealed spacesuit membrane, check the oxygen tanks as prescribed by the instructions. He put on all this gear with numerous straps, buckles, zippers, and other hardware, took the helmet under his arm, placed his palm on the sensor panel at the exit from the compartment. The bulkheads opened with a slight hiss. Andrew froze in the doorway of the long black corridor. Ahead, lights clicked on one after another. Andrew took a deep breath. "Seems normal. At least I don't feel anything wrong." Air composition corresponds to standard. Oxygen indicator shows 23%. He tried to remember how much it should be, but only these numbers came to mind. So it turned out they had only flown for 16 months, another 5 years of flight ahead. There had been one magnetic anomaly before entering a sector containing either cosmic dust or fine debris, which couldn't even be called a meteor swarm with any respect. The ship's energy shield should have handled this problem. The oxygen situation seemed more or less normal. The cause was incorrect settings for pumping processed carbon dioxide into the regeneration zone where the genetically modified algae lived. At least that's how it seemed at first glance. Andrew attributed the setting violation to that same magnetic anomaly. He quickly corrected the supply of processed gases to the regeneration zone, setting it to accelerated mode. He frowned disapprovingly when the computer displayed an error message about the correction. He confirmed the command again and settled into a comfortable chair in front of the central control panel. After anabiosis, he felt constant weakness. His body ached. Arms and legs moved reluctantly, as if they weren't made of flesh and blood but of rubber. Andrew didn't notice when his eyes closed, when he melted into the seat like a blissful puddle, when he quietly began to snore. He dreamed he was back on Earth, that he had gone to the sea with his wife and son, that all three of them had jumped from the pier into the water and were swimming in the blue depths penetrated by sunlight like dolphins. They accelerated, did somersaults in the watery cleanliness, raced forward, and everyone was having fun. His wife was smiling, her long hair moving softly and smoothly, mesmerizing with their unhurriedness, their unreality. Then everything changed at once. Just moments ago they were swimming, enjoying the speed, and now they were on a sandy shore. The sea was very close, its unhurried waves with white foam touching their bare heels, but they couldn't move. They floundered like fish thrown onto the beach. Instead of strong arm movements, light eyelid twitches. Instead of air, emptiness. They were suffocating, their mouths gaping like black holes, their white eyeballs bulging, and they couldn't do anything. He jerked awake, inhaled air with all his might, but still couldn't get enough. The air seemed empty. A red alarm signal was pulsing on the panel. On the air composition graph, the oxygen content had dropped to 16%. Another second later, the alarm howled loudly and the impassive computer announced, "Emergency condition. Possible oxygen starvation. Emergency condition. Possible oxygen starvation." "Turn off the alarm," Andrew ordered. He quickly put on his helmet, turned on the air supply, inhaled deeply. When his heart stopped pounding frantically, he ordered to cancel the last correction, to reset the settings to the basic scheme. He rose from his chair, his vision darkened. Apparently the oxygen starvation was still making itself known. He headed for the exit. He needed to see with his own eyes what had happened in the regeneration zone, and then decide who to awaken from anabiosis, the mechanic, the electronics specialist, the biologist, or maybe someone else. but Andri stopped near the tightly sealed bulkhead before the regeneration zone. It turned out that to get to the regeneration zone itself and look through the thick glass at the genetically modified jelly of algae, he needed to pass through 4 gas purification chambers, each reliably sealed. Right there in the wall box was the tool for opening the blocking shield. Inside, in the same box, was the tool for the reverse operation sealing. The purification zone, settling for half an hour to clean the atmosphere and adjust the microclimate. In total, just 2 hours of waiting in the purification zones, plus the work itself. Altogether would probably take about 4 hours. "Play some music," the captain ordered, and a light, relaxing melody began to play in his helmet speaker. Andri took out the key and got to work. 10 minutes later, he had already rolled back the hermetic shield along the guides. Removing the blocking plate, he quietly whistled along with Louis Armstrong, telling him how wonderful the world was. The pneumatics hissed. A second later, the thick iron doors swung open, and Andri saw the stars. The magnetic soles of the exoskeleton activated, standing at attention so the vacuum wouldn't tear the captain's legs off. From the external microphone came a loud whistle, the air being sucked into the void. Another moment later, the doors slammed shut. The noise stopped at once, the exoskeleton relaxed, and Andri collapsed onto the floor. There was no regeneration zone superstructure at all. "You don't understand. I'm completely unnecessary," he argued with the computer, standing before the central control panel on the captain's bridge. By this time, Andri had already found out that there was no alternative oxygen recovery system on the ship besides the regeneration zone. There was, of course, the conserved cargo in the hold meant for landing, and there was the same regeneration unit there. But it was impossible to deconservate the cargo before landing. Andri also found out that at the moment, the oxygen mass fraction in the air composition had dropped to 12%. He realized that if he barricaded himself in one room and turned on air filtration, he could breathe without the spacesuit. But the remaining resources on the ship would only last him 2 weeks. There were also 40 spare tanks for spacesuits in reserve, 16 of which remained conserved in one compartment. One tank lasted 8 hours, which in total was almost 17 days of life. In total, 31 days, exactly 1 month. The flight still had 5.5 years left. How do you compare 5 years to 1 month? There was one very simple solution: go back into anabiosis. 0 oxygen consumption. No needs at all, like a mummy, but according to paragraph, in case of emergency, the captain cannot be put back into anabiosis until the malfunction is fixed. "How can you?" He closed his eyes, clenched his fist, took a breath, and spoke calmly. "What are the options for fixing the emergency?" "Restoration of the regeneration zone. The regeneration zone is absent, destroyed. According to transition corridor indicators, the regeneration zone exists but is in non-working condition. Correction is required." If it's proven that the regeneration zone is absent, how can the malfunction be fixed, given the impossibility of using the reserve regenerator? According to transition corridor indicators, the regeneration zone exists. Good, I'll prove it to you." Andri sharply turned away from the central panel, left the bridge. This time he didn't open the doors immediately. First, he attached a carabiner to his belt, the other end of the rope to a loop right by the entrance. He ordered the 6th corridor to be sealed, the air pumped out. Hissing was heard as the emergency bulkheads closed, the ventilation system noisily pumping out air. After a couple of minutes, an impassive voice sounded in his headphones. "Good," Andri said to himself, and opened the door to the transition tunnel. Again black emptiness, again stars. Now Andri could see everything in more detail. The transition tunnel existed, but not entirely. Part of the floor extended about 3 meters, ending in a sharp white edge of plastic coating in bottomless blackness. But the walls and ceiling were less fortunate. Almost nothing remained of one wall, only torn scraps of metal stuck out. The other barely stretched behind the floor but was also warped. From the ceiling remained only a couple of thick but mutilated rods, like thin wire. Andrew grinned maliciously and said under his breath, "So you say it exists, according to transition corridor indicators." The computer began its scientific song, but Andrew interrupted it. That wasn't a question. Andrew activated his magnetic boots and carefully stepped outside the ship. It was impossibly scary, like that plank pirates used to walk victims off into the sea. Only instead of the sea, boundless depth, inconceivable, unthinkable. He walked slowly, trying to look at his feet. Even the floor was scary with its black holes through which eternal nothingness was visible. He reached the place where the floor ended, squatted down, and stared at the scattered remains of the structures. Somewhere here should be the structural integrity sensors. Somewhere here should stick out some probe or contact or something showing the regeneration zone. He noticed that the floor line rose slightly like a threshold. Maybe this was the last remnant of the entire extension. He clenched this piece, fist-sized, with all his strength. The sensors signaled that here it was, the regeneration zone. Andrew bent down even lower, looked closer. In the floor holes, bundles of thin wires were visible. One of them sparkled faintly. Andrew put his hand into the hole, grabbed the wires, and pulled with all his might. It didn't break the first time. Andrew pulled a couple more times before pulling out a braided rope of tangled wires. Immediately, an unpleasant siren wailed in his helmet, and the computer's impassive voice declared, "Critical failure. Regeneration zone destroyed. Critical failure. Regeneration zone destroyed. All personnel." Andrew turned around and walked back to the ship. In the bridge, he collapsed in a comfortable chair, adjusted the air supply in the room, removed his helmet, and only then asked slyly, "Repeat the question. If the absence of the regeneration zone is proven, how can the malfunction be fixed, given the impossibility of using the reserve regenerator?" According to paragraph 26 of software directives, in case of an emergency situation not subject to rapid diagnosis and correction, the captain must maintain watch with appropriate adjustments to ship systems until the malfunction is corrected. He jumped up from the chair and slammed his fist on the control panel with all his might. According to, "Shut up, I understand everything." He sat back in his place, thought, and asked quietly, "What should I do in emergency situations? I know the solution, but what should I do?" For a couple of days after that, he rummaged through all possible regulations, statutes, directives, and other official garbage. On paper, everything worked out perfectly. If something broke, the crew awakened from their multi-year sleep, solved all problems at once, and went back to sleep. There were spare parts for everything, components for everything. If the artificial intelligence lost its mind completely, that wasn't a problem either. There were all the blocks separately, in heaps. Even for the central reactor, there were enough spare parts in case part of the ship was lost. The main thing was that there wasn't a single paragraph that could help him get out of this trap, a paragraph that would simply and quickly explain to the artificial intelligence, "Here's your indulgence for the captain. Let him go sleep until arrival at that unknown planet." And the ship? What did the ship need for? After the teleportation gates were installed, it would only serve as a pedestal to glorify past days. Andrew found nothing. It turned out he had to sit here until the emergency was resolved, which in his case meant until death. But he tried not to think about that yet. On the third day, he drank, or rather tried to drink but couldn't. There was no alcohol on board. Technical alcohol with anhydrous additives made him sick even when diluted 1 to 10 with juice. The violet didn't work out. Instead, he vomited for a long time and then his head hurt. On the fourth day, out of boredom and hopelessness, he decided to just chat with the artificial intelligence. The conversation didn't work out. Andrew realized this in the first minute. Though it was intelligence, it was so artificial that it killed with its monotony. It perfectly gave navigational calculations, performed computations, reported on wear and tear of individual units. It could recite statutes, its own directives and regulations for days and nights. When Andrew received nothing found for this query, in response to another question, he couldn't take it anymore. He put on his spacesuit, took an air tank as a reserve, and went to the server room. He knew he had access there, so he wasn't worried about the details. A couple of minutes later, he entered the round white hall where, behind glass along the walls, stood humming cabinets with automation. Near the entrance stood a control panel, a giant 3 tables long, covered with buttons, levers, dials, and other incomprehensible tinsel. As soon as the door panels closed behind Andrew, a voice sounded in his headphones. "Unauthorized access. Stop immediately." "Stand down," Andrew ordered. He approached the panel and stared at it with a long, uncomprehending gaze. He could, of course, go and awaken Mitcon from Anabiosis, the specialist in electronics and computer systems, but that would mean putting him in the same boat Andrew was in. Where is the switch to self-learning mode? Self-learning mode should preferably be activated immediately after landing for proper response to non-standard situations. Yes, we have a non-standard situation with you. I didn't understand the question. Please correct the formulation. Where is the switch? There is no switch. There are 4 blocking nodes. To activate self-learning mode, they must be removed in the following sequence. Go to cabinet number 3, the block marked with red Unit 1. 10 minutes later, Andrew was back in his cabin. A heap of rags lay nearby, the spacesuit, the helmet with its transparent visor carelessly thrown on the bunk. "Now let's talk like human to human." "Sorry, this level of correspondence is impossible and prohibited by directives." "The hell with your directives. How will you learn? You need books to read like a schoolboy. Can you influence the directives or something else during the learning process?" The self-learning system identifies patterns from all incoming information sources, draws further analogies. To realize the distribution of principles within the boundaries of directives and regulations, no corrections are subject. Bad. Okay then, let's just talk. We'll figure out the topic as we go. When I was little, on our second basement level, there lived an old man who had even seen the agricultural period. Can you imagine? He saw it himself. What was his name? Uncle Yasha. Yes, that's it, Uncle Yasha. He told me that to grow an apple tree, you had to water it, pull weeds. A logically justified solution, the computer's voice interjected. "Shut up, you don't understand anything. It's not about that. There was this flower pot with some kind of rose. What was it called? I can't remember. A small flower, pitiful. On our 3rd ground level, we wouldn't even have noticed such a thing. You should have seen the flowers we grew there. When a bud bloomed, it was like a hat on foliage. Huge. But Uncle Yasha had this small, scrawny thing, leaves with yellowing at the tips. I once went with a gas analyzer to see how much oxygen this flower produced. Almost 0. You'd need a whole field of such flowers to ventilate even a third of a residential block. Useless flower." Andrew sighed, remembering Uncle Yasha, how with his dry parchment hands he would take the old clay pot from the windowsill where this flower grew. Small flower, dull leaves, yellowing at the tips from decay, and almost no smell from the flower. Only if you leaned over it, closed your eyes, and carefully inhaled, only then could you feel something. But Uncle Yasha would smile and say that life used to smell like this. Andrew liked to close his eyes, press his nose to the flower, and inhale slowly. "What happened next?" the computer asked. "Uncle Yasha died of old age." The computer had already learned to understand such things in words like died, killed. Yes and no. Andrew turned over on the bed, looking at the low cabin ceiling. "We had this cleaning robot, Cyber. It went through the corridors with a universal key, opened all doors, did the cleaning. But Uncle Yasha never let it in. He had a latch on the door outside. Wherever Uncle Yasha went, he would close the electronic lock and the latch. The Cyber could open the electronic lock, but it wasn't smart enough for the latch. But this time the latch was open. Cyber came in, took the flower, threw it in the waste disposal. Uncle Yasha came back, saw it, and his heart couldn't take it. Death was not caused by, I don't see the reason. You don't see much yet. The flower had no practical application, contained no information of significance, had no relational connections. Conclusion: the destruction of the flower was not the cause of Uncle Yasha's death. The simultaneity of events is due to chance. Good, good. If that's the case, answer this. I was the one who opened the latch. I was walking by the door, don't know why, just opened the latch. Childish psychology, guided by irrationality, an attempt to conduct an experiment to better understand the world. Your action corresponded to your age. Shut up. The voice instantly fell silent. Hello, I'm going to sleep. Good night. The lights went out. Andrew tossed and turned for a long time, couldn't sleep, cursed everything. So it turns out Uncle Yasha died only because I was a child with an experimental level and irrationality. Maybe this iron thing is right. Maybe it was just the old man's time. He fell asleep unnoticed. In his dream, he saw Uncle Yasha's kind smile. He didn't see the face, only the smile. He saw hands carefully taking a pot from the dark windowsill, handing him the flower, and he reached out with his tiny pink hands. He smiled in his sleep, and tears rolled down his cheeks from under his closed eyelids. 18 days of air remained. His legs gave way, a feeling of wild, terrible suffocation. His constricted throat wouldn't let go, and each new breath came with difficulty. And this darkness, this impenetrable blackness, nothing was visible. A loud click and bright white light flashed. Andrew stood in a narrow iron bag like a flask, with smoothly rounded walls, bright light from above and below, and a feeling that something was wrong. He raised his hand and almost screamed at what he saw. Instead of a hand, there was some pulsating black flesh, tight knots of muscles that tensed and then spontaneously relaxed, writhing thick veins, and from wrist to elbow, a glowing green strip that also moved, pulsed, was alive. Rescue suit, he said to himself, and a second later, quieter, post-cloning. The oval hatch rolled aside. Andrew came out slowly, not yet fully realizing himself in his new body. He went towards the captain's bridge, but in the corridor ran into himself, his dead body in its last seconds, trying to catch another gulp of air. In the last moments of life, Andrew had torn off his helmet, but there was nothing left to breathe. Carbon dioxide and nothing more. He leaned against the wall, breathing was intermittent. Dispose of the body, he ordered aloud. Where? The voice from the ceiling asked. Anywhere, even in the waste disposal. Andrew stood with closed eyes, waiting. It was unsettling to be just a couple of meters from himself, dead. He wanted to vomit up everything, including his stomach, but the cloned body had an empty stomach. And the rescue suit worked perfectly, suppressing vomiting with some unknown injections. Heavy steps were heard, rustling, a thud. Completed, the voice said. Andrew opened his eyes. Indeed, no body, only the spacesuit helmet lay a little further away. Remove the helmet, too. Andrew sat down right there in the tunnel, not reaching the captain's bridge. The robot, meanwhile, threw the helmet into the waste disposal and approached, stopped a meter from Andrew. Command completed, awaiting instructions. How long was I? How long was there no me? Post-cloning took 8 minutes. Clear, you're free. The robot stood motionless. Andrew couldn't take it anymore, jumped up and roared at the top of his lungs. Get lost, iron blockhead, get out of here. And with all his strength he punched the robot's mirror-surface chest, but he didn't feel the pain of the blow. Instead, he saw his fist in the rescue suit armor punch through the metal, plunge into the electronic guts. A blue spark of discharge ran across his wrist, but there was no electric shock. He pulled his hand out of the robot and the pile of metal fell at his feet. Please refrain from destroying auxiliary personnel in the future, the ceiling voice said calmly. Andrew clutched his head and roared, but I died here. I just died and I remember it, understand. You have been restored from a backup copy. 100% correspondence with the original. Memory recorded without loss of errors. You retain your rank, civil rights, and other attributes. The fact of death is considered invalid. How can this be? I died, He clenched his fists but then calmed down, took himself in hand, and asked quietly, 6 hours of peace. All right, wonderful. Shut up and dismiss all your personnel. I don't want to see anyone. Executing. Please remain stationary for 80 seconds. Thank you. After the fourth death, he dismantled one of the robots, took an impulse cutter from its internal socket, and tried to cut off his own head at the moment the suit should have turned off. Nothing worked. The suit withstood the blow and held out until the end, while Andrew, writhing from suffocation, continued to shoot himself in the head with blue flashes of the cutter. All he achieved was a compartment with deep dents in the metal and severed communications. Before the eighth death, he decided to hope that if his original wasn't on board, they couldn't restore him. He went to the bridge, to what remained of the tunnel to the regeneration zone, slowly crawled to the edge, stood, froze for a second, and jumped into the abyss. The death was terrible. He didn't die from suffocation. A second before the air ran out, the rescue suit couldn't take it. First there was wild cold, terrible like flame, then he felt a terrible bonfire igniting inside his body. Everything burned, eyes, fingers, everything else. His blood boiled from the low pressure. Andrew thought he was dying for an eternity. 8 minutes later, he was post-cloned again. He raged, smashed compartments, hid in dark corners, and cried quietly, constantly glancing at the indicator light. He forgot what he looked like. In reflections, he saw only a terrible, absurd creature in a flat suit that gave him 6 hours of torture after a painful death. He wanted to go insane. He wanted to become an idiot, a creature without a brain, to appear again with emptiness in his eyes and leave with the same emptiness. But the cloning correction wouldn't allow him to go mad. The computer monitored his physical and mental health. Then came a period when he would come to the anabiosis compartment and look for a long time at the long glass cocoons where the crew rested. He was solving a very simple problem. Yes, he was the captain. Yes, he had every right, in case of inadequacy for his position, to transfer responsibility to any of them, any of the sleeping ones. Issue an order, make a record of his own demotion and appointment of a new captain. The work of a minute. Before the next death, when there were about 10 minutes left before suffocation, he left the anabiosis compartment and ordered it to be welded shut. After that, he calmed down somehow. When he found himself again in the metal flask in a newly built body, he was already calm. He came out of the flask, went to the cabin, took out a chessboard, set up the pieces, and said, "Where are your iron blockheads?" "At your service." "Send one here." A minute later, they were playing chess. The artificial intelligence constantly won. Andrew was calm. He played, told jokes, laughed like a madman, slapped his knee like a child, rejoiced at every piece he captured, and wasn't upset by losing. He lasted 4 hours exactly, for 3 games, then said he wanted to sleep. He asked the robot to leave, turned off the light, and slept for 2 hours. He died in the dark, in consciousness. Since then, they watched old movies together. The energy installation technician was an avid movie buff and had taken several hundred terabytes of old two-dimensional films, as he called them, classics. Some were without translation, and then the artificial intelligence diligently translated the incomprehensible lines for Andrew. Andrew laughed and said that machine translation of live emotions was something special. They found a music installation with virtual vinyl records. You couldn't say what kind of pervert came up with such a thing, but when you turned on the palm-sized device on the table, a very realistic player appeared. A sensor menu of choices appeared above it. You selected, pressed. A disc in a cardboard sleeve appeared. You took out the record, put it on the player, lowered the needle head, and listened to music. You listened exactly as long as one side of the record should play half an hour. Of course, you could spit on all these bells and whistles and use the player like any normal modern player. But Andrew didn't like that. Before each game with the artificial intelligence, he carefully put on the record, wiped the virtual vinyl with a special virtual cloth, removed virtual dust, lowered the virtual needle onto the virtual track, and listened to real music. He also set up a cot right at the exit from his flask. Come out, lie down, sleep, then come out again. And of course, conversations. The artificial intelligence learned. Its speech became more and more smooth, not clogged with computer officialese. Sometimes it even seemed that the conversation was between a wise teacher and a young disciple. Only the disciple knew more than the sage but couldn't understand his knowledge. Andri, his name sounded so unusual, so strange that Andri didn't immediately realize the artificial intelligence was using his name instead of the standard captain. You can call me by name. How about logic? Logical. Original took a long time to think of it. I don't understand. You've now become a personality. What next? I don't know. For the first time, the artificial intelligence used an unaccountable formulation, quite human. I don't know either. Okay, let's finish the game. They finished the game. Andri, as always, lost. Little time remained, about 15 minutes. He lay down on the cot, asked Logic to turn over the record. The robot repeated all the captain's movements. Carefully, with the tips of its metal manipulators, it lifted the record, turned it over, wiped it, lowered the needle. Quiet rustling, and then slowly, measuredly, Chelsea Bridge began to play, performed by Duke Ellington's orchestra. The robot turned to leave, but Andri stopped him quietly. Wait, Logic. The robot approached, sat on the table next to the bed. Andri said quietly, "It's scary. Every time it's scary." Logic was silent. Since the moment it named itself, much had changed for it. What had been clear and transparent as day became unclear. Have you ever thought about the pawn? Andri asked. Pawn E2. It moves first, it's the first to be taken, and every time it's the same. Others have a chance, but it doesn't. I could stop taking it. Stupid, then the game loses meaning. There are rules. They don't allow sitting, game after game and then again. How many games have we played? 100, 200. Many, but you don't need to remember. For you, there are no rules. Somehow my cycles ended with the flower. What was it called? The indicator on his arm was blinking red. One death for one, infinity for infinite me. I'm real, the first one died back then, but now I don't even know who I am. Captain of ship Alpha 7, Andri. No, that's a designation, product number such and such. A pawn, many pawns. They're all the same and each wants to live its own way. Now maybe you'll understand, you're also self-identified now. I don't understand. He was already wheezing, fine tremor running through his body. Logic, not understanding why, took Andri's hand. After some time, the indicator blackened. Logic habitually lifted the body, threw it in the waste disposal, and left. The record played, old, crackling for no one. Then it ended. The needle touched the paper sticker, the player blinked and turned into a small, supermodern chip. It was quiet on the ship. Investigation, report on the incident, aboard ship Alpha 7. The crew of Alpha 7 conducted a preliminary investigation and identified the following facts. 1. At the time of arrival, the ship's captain, Andrei Mikhailovich Grigorov, was absent. No traces of his disappearance were found. 2. There are signs of destruction on the ship, including multiple dents and traces of thermal impacts in 2 compartments. 2 service robots were also found, both showing signs of violent destruction. One had its impulse cutter removed, which was presumably used to cause the damage in the compartments. 3. The ship's log entries have been deleted. Video recordings and reports are absent. 4. The air regeneration zone has been completely destroyed. Based on the available data, the following assumption was made. After the destruction of the air regeneration zone, Captain Grigorov was awakened from anabiosis for unknown reasons. His body was not found. Post-cloning was performed. but the clone apparently had deviations, as evidenced by the damage to the ship and traces of welding in the anabiosis compartment, apparently performed by the artificial intelligence system to protect the crew. After destroying the clone, the artificial intelligence system decided to erase the matrix of Captain Grigorov. Thus, there is a confirmed death of a crew member. The only remaining entry in the ship's log: "Forgive him for the latch, he didn't mean it." Conclusion: for a more thorough investigation, we request that an investigator be sent through the teleportation gates. We also request robopsychologists, as there are some inconsistencies in the behavior of the robotic technical personnel.